Hey guys, today's episode is sponsored by Nurex. Now, I have been very transparent with you about my mental health, sometimes probably a little bit like too TMI. And recently you might remember when I started telling you about my intrusive thoughts, how it's just something that I struggle with. I've struggled with it for years. Sometimes I am in the middle of recording and I think back like, did I drop my kids off at school? Did I get them out of the car? Did I lock them in a hot car? Just always thinking the worst and just allowing my thoughts to take me to some really dark places. And when I shared that, many of you suggested and recommended that I not only talk with someone, but possibly even explore getting on medication, thinking that maybe it's a case of OCD. But if you're anything like me, you've probably put your own mental health on the back burner more times than you would like to admit. For me, more times than I can even really count. But your mental health, it truly does matter just as much as anything else. And that is where Nurex comes in. Nurex makes it so easy to take control over your health from the comfort of your own home, whether you're navigating anxiety, depression, or just feeling a little off lately. Nurex connects you with a licensed medical provider online. No long wait lists, no awkward waiting rooms, no hoping for a call back soon and it really takes weeks on end. It's so fast. And the best part is you can message your provider anytime. You'll have unlimited access to message with your medical team with any questions. Plus, your medical team will proactively check in with you and monitor your progress. And Nurex ships your treatment directly to your door in discreet packaging. There's no need to visit a pharmacy. There's no need for anybody to know what's arriving and what medication you're on. It's just private, it's convenient, it's affordable, and over 2/3 of Nurex patients have reported real relief from their symptoms. And thank you to Nurex for sponsoring today's video. Taking control of your health starts here. Go to nurex.com/10tolife to get started or click the link in the description. That's nurx.com/10tolife.
Breaking news tonight. Is there a New England serial killer?
A series of bodies turning up in New England, and with each new discovery, the level of fear and speculation is growing in the community, and now everyone's wondering if there's a serial killer.
But there are serious questions right now about could there be a serial killer stalking states?
One skull in the woods. Another body pulled from a river. A woman zipped inside a suitcase. It sounds like a horror movie, except it's not. It's real, and it's happening right now. Over the past few weeks, human remains have been turning up all across Massachusetts, Connecticut, even Rhode Island. Different towns, different states. But the timing, the eerie similar circumstances, it has people asking, is this all just a disturbing coincidence, or is something much darker going on? Authorities say that there is no threat, no connection, no serial killer. But with each new body found, that explanation gets harder and harder to believe. This case is still unfolding in real time, and I actually talked about it briefly in a recent Headline Highlights episode. But since then, the conversation has exploded. There is so much speculation, so many theories, and yet so few concrete answers. So today, we are breaking down everything we know so far about what many people are calling the New England serial killer. The timeline, the controversy, the rumors, and of course, the chilling details that have people wondering what's really going on here. This case is confusing, it's controversial, and it's potentially very, very dangerous. And it's all unfolding right before our very eyes. Hey guys, I'm Elise. Thank you so much for being here today. This is 10 to Life, and let's get into it. Theories and rumors of a potential serial killer first began circulating online earlier this year, after March 6th to be exact, when remains of a human skull were found in a wooded area in Plymouth, Massachusetts. A man was apparently searching the area for deer antlers, and that's when he came across a skull. And the skull was described as being jawless, small, and discolored. And it had definitely been there for a while, and at first the guy thought, okay, maybe this is from an animal. But then the longer that he looked at it, the more that he realized this couldn't have been from an animal. This could actually be human. So he called 911 around 9:30 that morning to report what he had found, and a full investigation was launched almost immediately. But here's the thing. Investigators searched the entire area and it came up completely empty. No body, no other remains, just this one singular skull. Now, given it was found in a wooded area, it is possible that animals spread the balance of the remains. This wouldn't be something that we haven't seen before, but it still is very wild to think about. You find that and nothing else? Now, unfortunately, the skull still hasn't been linked to any one person. There are a few theories, of course, circulating in the media, but the investigators haven't released any of their own theories. Not even a guess. Not a guess about the person's age, their gender, nothing. All that they have confirmed so far is that, yes, it is a human skull. So let's quickly go over a couple of the theories about it that have gotten the most attention out there. According to Boston 25 News, there are 2 missing women from the area whose families are now facing this heartbreaking possibility that this could be their loved one, or I guess better yet, asking themselves the question, could this be our loved one? Sandra Crispo disappeared seemingly without a trace back in August of 2019. She had disappeared from her home in Hanson, Massachusetts, and every day since then her family has been mourning, wondering if they will ever get the answers that they want so badly. Sandra's family believes that her disappearance is foul play, potentially due to somebody believing that she was rich and going after her for money. See, a couple of years before her disappearance, her father had died, and I guess there was this whole thing about inheritance money that Sandra actually didn't end up receiving for whatever reason. So they thought that, okay, maybe this could be a financially motivated crime. So that's the first potential victim. Brittany McCormick of Hanover, Massachusetts, was last seen on July 7th, 2021. This was after spending time with her mother at her mother's house. One minute, they were just hanging out, talking about what their week ahead looked like, but then the next, Brittany was missing. And she's a mother of a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old, and her family has long believed that she would never just willingly leave her 2 children behind. Now, both cases have been investigated, but so far, very little information has come from either one. And just to be clear, any connection between these women and that skull that was found is purely speculation. Their names haven't been mentioned by law enforcement, nothing like that. This is all just based on the public's theories of their own. And to be honest, I'm not sure why these 2 women's cases were brought up and brought into the mix. Maybe simply because they were women missing in the area. I don't know. But I just say that so that you can take it all with a grain of salt. Their family members were also interviewed by the same news station, and it seems like they don't even really know what to believe or what to hope for either. So at this point in today's episode, you might be wondering to yourself, okay, so a skull was found. 2 women are missing. Yeah, it's sad, but what on earth does that have to do with a potential serial killer just roaming throughout New England? Well, it's because this was just the beginning of what felt like a tidal wave of remains being found in the New England area. Because that same day on March 6th, more human remains were found, this time in Norwalk, Connecticut. Now, Norwalk isn't close to Plymouth by any means. I mean, we're talking about a 3-hour difference, so it's not like your stereotypical horror movie where all these bodies are just being found in the same small town and all eerily discovered back to back and that whole thing. It's not. But it is still in the New England area. Now, these remains were identified as belonging to missing 35-year-old Paige Fannin. And what we know about Paige's disappearance, like a lot of other things with this entire case, are pretty vague. We do know that she was reported missing in New York back on March 4th, and she was last seen on the 5th in Connecticut. Then her body was found the following day in the Norwalk River. And what initially tipped the investigators off to even search that river was when her clothing and her other personal items were found on the riverbank. And from what I'm able to tell, it seems like the investigators are still looking into her cause of death, or at the very least haven't divulged all of that information. If they do already have it and have that info, they're just keeping it close to themselves. Now, Paige's family describes her as loving, very nurturing, saying, if you had the honor of knowing Paige, you would know how deeply she cared for who she loved, and you would know how strong she would fight for you when you were down. The Norwalk police stated that they saw absolutely no signs of foul play in Paige's death. However, it is still under investigation. So, I don't know what that really means. If there is no suspicion of foul play, do they think that maybe she accidentally fell in? That maybe this was self-inflicted? I mean, if it's an accident, why were her clothes and her belongings on the side of the river? That seems kind of weird, right? So that's 2 remains that were found on the same day. And again, you might be thinking, okay, well, how could anyone ever say that these are related? I mean, definitively anyway, especially if the investigators aren't even saying it. Well, the answer to that is actually pretty simple. And it's because it kept happening. On March 19th, more remains were found. The remains weren't found in Plymouth or Norwalk. Now they were found in Groton, Connecticut, which is about an hour and a half away from Norwalk. And at first, these remains were not identified. The only information that we really knew was that the detectives believed that the remains were from a woman, someone between the age of 40 and 60 years old. However, there has since been an update. The remains were identified as 58-year-old Suzanne Wormster. Now, apparently, she hadn't been in contact with friends or family for a few months at that point, but it's unclear whether she was ever officially reported missing or if she just voluntarily disappeared. Nobody really knows, and I couldn't find any photos of her or even a missing persons poster. And that kind of makes me wonder if she was ever really reported missing at all. Now, as for how Suzanne was found, she was found stuffed inside of a suitcase near a cemetery in Groton. The cemetery is called Ledyard Cemetery. Now, according to People magazine, the investigators believed that the remains were left there in or around mid-February. The volunteers at the cemetery who fill in as groundkeepers of sorts hadn't been there to mow the grass or do anything at all really since the fall. So it made sense why she wasn't found right away. Not to mention it was also still pretty cold out during that time, so I would imagine not many people were going in and out of the cemetery necessarily. So now people were really starting to talk. 3 bodies were found within just weeks of each other, and in much smaller, more laid-back New England towns. So it just kind of seemed odd to a lot of people, like there's some sort of connection. And maybe odd isn't even the right word for it. It just seemed statistically uncharacteristic for these types of areas. Not to mention Suzanne obviously did not put herself in that suitcase, right? So with that, there was no way that these investigators could continue to say that there were no signs of foul play, at least in regards to Suzanne's death. The thing with Suzanne's case, though, is that an arrest had actually been made. 68-year-old Donald Coffell was arrested and charged with the murder, also with tampering with evidence and with improper disposal of Suzanne's body. Now, unless people believe Donald is a serial killer, it seems like Suzanne's case is not connected to the other ones that we're going to be talking about today. And just by looking at pictures of him, I'm honestly shocked how he was able to even kill one person, let alone others. But I say that because he kind of looks to be in pretty rough condition.
So we have databases that the state agencies as well as ourselves participate in. Those databases did not result in any information coming back to us to say that anything was related. In addition, we monitor the same sources as everybody else does in the community. When individuals provide information from out of state, and we can contact those police departments, we reach out and talk to their investigators to find out if there's any link. We have no information that links our incident to anything else that took place within the state or outside in the surrounding area.
But that's just the thing. They don't think that Donald is a serial killer, yet they do think that he murdered Suzanne, yes. They believed, though, that it was just a one-time, targeted, single attack.
Both the victim and the suspect knew each other, and this was a targeted event. Let's go over a timeline. On 3/19/25, we responded to a crime scene at Colonel Ledyard Cemetery where the victim was located. Detectives then began talking with neighbors in the area and checking for video coverage, which could assist in uncovering what had happened along with establishing a timeline. Additionally, follow-up was performed and on leads that were received via the department's social media page, as well as calls placed to the department by community members. This included contacting other police departments in surrounding states to research whether or not the reported incidents were related. On 4/11/25, a tip line was established, which began to receive additional information. And on 4/16/25, a tip received from a concerned citizen provided a possible victim identification and led us to Allen Street. On 4/17/25, the Allen Street residence was searched, and another crime scene was discovered and processed. This resulted in the initial identity of a suspect who was interviewed at that time as a person of interest. On 4/18, with the initial testing completed, the 2 crime scenes were connected. On 4/22/25, the suspect was interviewed for a second time, and on the same day, a witness came forward with specific details about the crime as told to them by the suspect. And on 4/23 of 25, the suspect was interviewed for a third time, and at that time confessed to the murder, providing details that matched the scene documentation as well as evidence collected by the investigators.
But this arrest didn't really calm people's nerves because bodies kept turning up. Just 2 days after Suzanne's remains were found, another discovery was made. This time, the body of 59-year-old Denise Leary, a missing woman from Connecticut, and she was found in New Haven, the same city where she had been living before she disappeared. Her disappearance was reported sometime around September 29th or September 30th of 2024, though sources differ on the exact date. Now, Denise's body was found somewhat close to her home on Rock Creek Road. Her remains were found after her neighbors were clearing brush in a more, heavily wooded area, and they stumbled across them. The biggest thing to note, though, was that her body had decayed quite a bit. I mean, so much so that the investigators even said that when they were at the scene, they weren't able to make out an age, a race, or even a gender of who these remains belonged to. So if her remains had gone through the seasons of, fall, then rough New England winter, then spring, it makes sense that her body would be in pretty bad shape. Her official cause and manner of death have been ruled as undetermined. However, it was noted that there were no signs of foul play that were spotted during her autopsy. And the specific quote given by Newport police officer Christian Bruckhart was this: "There is no indication that this woman's remains found in New Haven are the result of a homicide. Denise Leary was suffering from some mental health diagnoses, and her remains were found near where she lived. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner performed an autopsy and was unable to establish an exact cause of death." Now, this has been something that her close family members also admitted to. They've stated that Denise's overall mental health involved depression and anxiety. Her son even mentioned that a couple of days prior to her disappearance, she was acting weird and her behavior was just off. And from what I could tell, her family has never said one way or another whether they think her disappearance and death was suspicious or if they think it was just an unfortunate accident due to poor mental health. So I'm not saying right away that I believe that these are all connected, but I'm sure you have now started to notice a trend here, right? The majority of these remains are coming back as inconclusive in similar small little towns. We don't know how they died, we don't know the details, but then we're told to just trust law enforcement that there were no signs of foul play. And look, maybe that really is the truth. Maybe these deaths aren't connected. It is possible. But what's fueling all of this speculation and all of this worry from nearby residents is the lack of transparency from law enforcement. If there were definitive causes of death, like this person had a heart attack, this person had a stroke, this person was self-inflicted, I don't think that these rumors would be spreading the way that they have been. And it also reminds me a lot of the Rainy Street Ripper case that we covered not too long ago, where bodies just kept turning up in Lady Bird Lake. This is down in Austin, Texas. People there also couldn't help but wonder, this feels weird. This feels like maybe there's too many bodies for it to be a coincidence. And honestly, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to start asking the questions, especially with this case, because as you'll see, the uncertainty only gets deeper from here. So like I said, Denise's body was found on March 21st. Then, a few days later, on March 26th, yet another body was found. This time, the body was found in the coastal town of Warwick, Rhode Island. 56-year-old Michelle Romano was first reported missing by a family member on August 18, 2024. Her body was also found in a wooded area. And in an article by the Providence Journal that was published on April 9th, the state detective stated that the circumstances surrounding her death were, quote, suspicious. Nothing more, nothing less, just suspicious. Investigators even appealed to the public for help, believing that someone might have seen something, or maybe that a home security camera footage caught something or captured something around the time that Michelle disappeared, without the owner maybe even realizing it at the time. And the most recent update that I could find on Michelle's cause or manner of death had been posted on April 7th, and the article claimed that the circumstances of her death were still unknown. Her family feels that she was most likely murdered, which I totally understand. It's hard to believe that a perfectly happy and healthy mother of two would just go missing, only for her remains to be found months and months later in a wooded area without any foul play being involved. I mean, that doesn't make much sense. That's just my opinion, but the math ain't really mathing there. Now, Michelle's friends and family described her as a very bubbly and very energetic person. Her favorite thing in the whole world was to be outdoors, touching grass, being in nature, which what a heartbreaking reality that her remains were found in one of her favorite places to be, right? So now by this point, the theories and the rumors online were starting to go crazy. And from what I could tell, these rumors all started on Facebook, because that's when a group dedicated to what they were calling the New England serial killer pretty much went viral. And if you look up the group today, there are quite a few different ones, all with pretty hefty followings. So I'm not sure which one exactly got these rumors started, like what was the catalyst in all of this. Maybe all of them around the same time. I'm not really sure. But as you can probably guess, the public felt like all of these remains that were being found were not just a coincidence. And look, no area is crime-free, right? And none of the areas that these remains were found in were completely crime-free either. I think it was more so the fact that so many were turning up all around the same time, and that's really what started freaking people out. And we're not even done yet with all the bodies to be found. So just keep in mind that by this point, people were already panicking, the different cases were already going viral, and the conversation was everywhere online. But they didn't even know what was still to come. So we left off with Michelle, who was found on March 26th. And a short, and I mean very short, span of time passed where there weren't any major breaking news headlines of bodies found. It was kind of like very quiet. However, that streak didn't last, because by April 9th, there was a new announcement. More remains were found, this time in Killingly, Connecticut. Now, although the remains haven't been formally identified at the time that I'm recording this, the investigators do have some details into who this person may be. And spoiler alert, it's a little bit different than what we have seen so far. It's believed that the remains belong to a male who was about 5 feet 8 inches tall and anywhere from the ages of 25 to 45. It's believed that they could either be Caucasian or Black, and that most likely they would have passed away in 2024 or 2025. So, somewhat recently. And the reports noted that nearly his entire skeleton was recovered. Yet, due to the state of decomposition, they really can't gather much more information. At least, not yet. Now, I'm not sure if that means that they can't identify the cause and manner of death, or if it's more referring to the description of the victim. Some people think that these remains are connected. Some don't. It really just depends on who you ask, because opinions are kind of all over the place. But what a lot of people are thinking is that because the level of decomp with these remains is so severe, could they have been killed, some a while ago, some recently, and now whoever is responsible is trying to find different dump sites, trying to get rid of them? Possibly. So then the following day after those remains were found, on April 10th, more remains were found. And I know, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but hear me out with this and just bear with me. That's how wild all of this is. So these remains were found in Framingham, Massachusetts. And they were discovered when a group of firefighters were actually fighting a brush fire, which, talk about a crazy way to find human remains, right? It's like you're putting a fire out and then you find a dead body that's not even related to the fire. And what's crazy about these remains in particular is that there is a total lack of information out there. All I could find was that the forensic anthropologist on the case stated, once again, there were no signs of foul play. But that's it. I couldn't find if they were ever identified or if they even had some sort of loose description of the potential victim and who they were, just nothing. Then, shortly after that, on April 22nd, you guessed it, more remains were found. Now this time, they were discovered off of a bike path in Springfield, Massachusetts. And for a while, the person was not identified. It was only said to be the remains of a woman. But there has been a recent update, and she has now been identified as a 45-year-old woman named Megan Meredith. The detectives have announced that her death is being treated as a homicide, though we don't know much else. We don't know how her body was found, what her cause of death was, not really much else. And either way, detectives are saying that there's no threat to the public. And look, I get why the investigators do say that. I truly do. They don't want people panicking. But also, you believe that someone was murdered by somebody else who is still roaming free, but there's no threat? I don't know, it seems very contradictory. And it was kind of similar, if you remember, when the Idaho murders first happened. Before they even arrested Brian Kohberger, they basically put out this statement saying there's no reason to feel like you're in harm's way or there's an active threat. But everybody's like, so does that mean it was targeted? Was it somebody close to them, which now we know is allegedly not the case? So I never like when they say you have nothing to worry about, because it's like, well, obviously somebody killed them and that person hasn't been arrested. You haven't identified them. So we probably do need to worry, right? Now, this is purely my own speculation, but I do wonder how recent the investigators believe Megan died, and if it was even maybe that same very day that she was found. You see, in the initial news reports about her body being found, they talk about how a woman was found unresponsive, which to me, that makes it seem like first responders weren't sure whether or not this person was deceased, just based off of looking at them, right? You know what I mean? You would be able to tell if it was a fresh body or a decomposed body. You wouldn't call decaying remains unresponsive, obviously. So I don't know what was really going on there, if it was something that was recent, but I did pick that up and it kind of piqued my curiosity. So then 3 days later, on April 25th, another body was found. This time, though, they immediately identified him as 51-year-old Samuel Stovall. He's of Taunton, Massachusetts, and Samuel was known as a homeless man in the area whose body ended up being found by walkers that morning in the Mill River. And unfortunately, I couldn't find much information about him or who he was as a person, which honestly was kind of disappointing because that one detail doesn't and shouldn't define him. I'm sure there's so much more to his story, but unfortunately, it's not really out there right now. Now, due to Samuel's body being in the water, presumably for a decent amount of time, he was pretty badly decomposed. The authorities claim that his death is still under investigation, but at this time, like everything else, they do not think it's suspicious or that there is foul play involved. Now, the online sleuths, they came to play, and they were quick to throw Samuel into the mix when it came to this potential serial killer. But again, the investigators are adamant that Samuel's death is not related to any of the others, pretty much continuing to say they're not looking into any sort of serial killer. Now, full transparency, I wouldn't be surprised if more remains were discovered by the time this episode is recorded and released. And no matter what you believe, whether you believe there's a serial killer on the loose or maybe it's not and these are just random murders, it's important to talk about these people. And it sucks that there isn't more information available about each one of them. However, hopefully as time goes on, more details will come to light and their stories will be told more fully and, complete. But I do want to dive a little deeper into this serial killer theory and get your thoughts on this. Because first and foremost, let me just say this. I want to be very clear that the leading detectives and state police on these cases have been adamant from day one that there is no serial killer. In a statement by Connecticut State Police that was given to News Channel 8, the detectives claimed, quote, "There is no information at this time suggesting any connection to similar discoveries in Rhode Island and the Connecticut shoreline area, and there is also no known threat to the public at this time." Now, I have a lot of different thoughts about this. On one side, I can agree with law enforcement. It's essential to not cause public panic, especially if there's truly no reason for it. I even saw on one website that people on the Facebook group are starting to blame specific people for the murders, which that feels like crazy town. Now, as much as we all are fascinated with true crime, myself obviously included, there's only so much that we can do. We aren't at the crime scenes, we don't have insider information, and we definitely don't have enough information to start pinning possible serial killings on random people without there being arrests, charges, indictments, anything like that. So at the end of the day, people online could just be putting innocent people at risk by calling them serial killers. And for what? With what evidence, right? But playing devil's advocate, I can also understand why a lot of people just can't comprehend that this is not the work of a serial killer. The information out there is lackluster overall. Whether that's because the detectives on the case really don't know much or they just don't want to share much with the public yet, I don't really know. And sure, you could argue that there isn't enough information to pile all of these people together as victims of a serial killer, but there also isn't enough information to throw out the possibility of it either. And I think that if we knew more about the causes of death, there would be less confusion and less speculation running around. For example, if every single victim's death was either a gunshot wound to the head or strangulation, that'd be pretty suspicious. If they were all different cause of deaths, natural causes, a stroke, this and that, then maybe suspicion would start to die down. And again, we don't know any of the answers, so people are just taking it upon themselves to fill in the blanks. And then you add in the fact that the ways that the bodies were disposed of, if they were even disposed of by one single person, they're all kind of random. Stuffed in a suitcase by a cemetery, a few in wooded areas, some in bodies of water or near bike paths. I don't know, if we're supposed to believe that all of this is the work of one person, it doesn't really feel very planned or calculated. it all seems kind of scattered, like too hit or miss here and there with no clear pattern or method, which that kind of randomness doesn't always exactly scream serial killer. Usually they're methodical. And if one person really was behind all of these deaths, they'd have to be doing a pretty good job of covering their tracks to not have been caught by now. Not that it's impossible. I mean, we've obviously seen it before with many other cases, but it's definitely worth pointing out. Yet I also can see, and I've also heard, like I mentioned briefly earlier, that maybe it's just a dumping situation. That some of these deaths were, yes, more recent than others, but that's the strategy. That's the methodical piece of it, is that they're not choosing the exact same dumping areas and that they're scattering them so that they don't get caught. So I don't know. I don't really know what to believe. With Lady Bird Lake, it feels to me like there is a serial killer, that there's some weird cover-up going on, that someone high-ranking could possibly be involved too. Like, it just feels weird. And if you haven't listened to that episode, definitely listen to it after this and share your thoughts with me. But the majority of people think that there is a serial killer, despite them continuously saying, no, 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 there's absolutely not one. So now in this situation, people once again are saying, okay, well, people don't find bodies every other week or every other day. That just doesn't happen. So how are you finding this many bodies within such a short window of time if it's not a serial killer, right? Like, well, what's the likelihood of that? Like I said, I'm trying to see both sides here. We've done cases where this exact thing happens too. Investigators tell everyone not to worry, that there's no serial killer, but then boom, the next thing you know, a serial killer is being investigated. And everybody's kind of just like, well, what the hell, guys, you just said not to worry. But again, I get it, because if they came out and said, yes, there is a serial killer, it's going to fuel fear-mongering, right? People are going to be worried, and that isn't necessarily good for anybody. So again, these are just a lot of my thoughts and things that I'm seeing online, which I cannot express it enough that the experts are saying not to panic and not to believe all of the rumors. So do your own research, form your own opinions, as always, just come to your own conclusions, okay? And for the sake of not just spewing my own thoughts, but wanting to know more expert opinions as well, I started digging around, looking at different credible news sources. I started looking at Court TV, Law and Crime. I mean, they also have been closely following this situation as well, following all these rumors, bringing in experts in different fields, getting their professional opinions. And it seems like all the experts that they're bringing forward are either saying that it's too early to tell, or that the deaths just don't seem connected, plain and simple.
In your professional opinion, do you think any of these cases are connected? Do you think we have a serial killer amongst us?
Unlikely, and there's no evidence of it whatsoever. That may turn out to be the case. Some of them are connected, but there's no evidence now. Some of the bodies, but at least one of the bodies, was so decomposed when it was reported, they couldn't even tell not only the cause of death, whether it was a homicide, natural accident, they couldn't even tell what gender it was until they did more investigation. So I think the internet rumors are fun, but they're a little too early.
Now, on the other side of the coin, some experts seem to be saying, well, while there's no definitive proof of a serial killer, look at all the weird details surrounding the remains that have been found. And when I was watching one video that was done by Court TV, I heard someone discussing something that I hadn't really put much thought into yet, but it was a really good point.
If we could put up on the screen where the 8 locations are, and John DePietro, from your perspective, you're a native, you're from this area, what does this tell you when you look at all of these locations? Does it tell a story at all, or is it seemingly random? Is there any sort of nexus among these locations?
Benny, what's so unusual about this is, number one, just that you're talking about, that's not a large area, and you're exactly right, the states do overlap. But as I've talked to the different police, something that comes into play is all of these different victims, for the most part, not all, but they all have different law enforcement agencies enforcing them. If it was a bigger state, if it was Florida, Texas, Michigan, California, you'd probably have, one unit, but you have all these different police organizations that are investigating this. Now, I have found that normally they don't always communicate with a lot of different crime. They've started to communicate now because they want to make sure that something isn't slipping through the cracks. If there is something that does link in, As I said, the corridor of New York to Boston, Vinny, you know, there are people sometimes that use it as a crime wave and they just come through these New England states. Many of the towns where these are found, they are somewhat sleepy towns. You don't have very aggressive police forces. They don't deal with a lot of that. So right now, I think the remains that have not been identified, that's what's really sparking the most interest from both the public and the police.
So again, is there actually something methodical to this? Making sure that all the jurisdictions aren't working together and somebody who is very smart and thought this through and that's why they chose these locations? I don't know. I've gone over a lot of the expert opinions, but if you're curious about why so many people are convinced that there is a serial killer out there, just check out any of those Facebook groups that I mentioned, because there are new posts popping up pretty much 24/7. And one interesting thing that I noticed is that many of the users are dead set on the killer being a truck driver. I guess geographically, some of the bodies were found closer to bigger highways and even interstates, so that's where that theory originates from. But I've also seen people theorizing that it's just a normal, regular person who has lived in New England all their lives. Other than that, though, nobody can really seem to agree on who this person is. And honestly, that's because, like the investigators and experts are saying, there's just not enough evidence to point towards that. So I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on all of this, because regardless of if you believe that these deaths are all coincidental or if you think it's connected and it's the work of a serial killer, you gotta admit that these are a lot of bodies that are being found in a short amount of time. And even though some remains were deemed, not suspicious, others were deemed as homicides. And serial killer or not, these people still deserve justice. And for those whose deaths aren't being investigated as crimes, their families still deserve answers. So thank you so much for listening or watching if you're over here on YouTube. I know today's case was a little bit controversial, disturbing, curious. I mean, kind of scary too, if we're just being honest. So thanks for listening, and I'm really curious to hear what you think. Could this actually be the work of a serial killer? Or not. Also, share the link to this video with a friend or family member and ask them what they think. When I covered this case very briefly on Headline Highlights, so many people were in the comments talking about how they had been talking to a friend or a family member about it. So now that we have some more information, or we have it all like succinct in one place, share this episode and let me know what they're saying too. All right, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will be back with you again very soon, and until the next one, stay safe. Bye.